And so the question is, how is it we're going to deal with a list like that? Because you kind of created an almost superhuman set of things people need to be able to do. And in fact, I do actually believe that the thing that we want from leaders is for them to be bigger than they've ever been before. I think that there's a call on leaders and all of us who support leaders to actually be bigger than humans have been asked for before. And the question is, what do we do with that? How do we live and be in that space? So I have some stuff I've been thinking about that. Thought we'd maybe talk about it. Here's where I think we are, right? People ask me why I moved to New Zealand. That's my front yard. That's why I moved to New Zealand. This idea, right, about have we actually gone farther ahead than we know how to be? I think we have, right? I think we've actually gone out farther. We've created systems and societies and businesses that are more complex than we know how to deal with them. So how do we do the growing we need to do in order to keep up with this? How do we get in shape for the jog back? And there's this great set of theories that I think about a lot, that some of you might think about a lot, that I'll talk about just a little bit. But Rama was talking about them before, and Bob will talk about them a little bit too. It's this idea about how grown-ups grow and change over time. Right? We all know that kids grow and change over time, and thank goodness for that. And there's this amazing thing that they figured out. People have been talking about it for a long time, but they've really only been researching it for like the last 50, 60 years. This idea about how we grow. We know that the things that you would expect from somebody about this high are different than the things that you would expect from somebody about this high, right? But when we kind of reach our adult height, how do you know? How do you know? Do you really expect? And there's this idea of wisdom. You kind of know it when you see it, but what does that even look like? So there are these theories about adult development and how we grow and change over time that I find super helpful. And I also find incredibly inspiring this idea that we can, right? This idea that we don't just grow old and decline, but we actually get better stuff. We don't just gain weight and lose hair, but we actually get more of some things that we might care about. So what does that look like? You probably can think back to a time in your life, and probably to a time in your last week, when the perspectives of others were the thing that guided you the most, right? We all go through this time in our lives that Bob Keegan talks about as the socialized form of mind, right? When actually the thing that makes us up comes from the outside. You were talking about that it's quite noisy. It's quite a noisy place to be, especially in a complex world, right? Because there are lots of things that come at us from the outside. And this is a time when we determine how good we are at things by what other people tell us. We figure out what the best thing to do is by what other people say. We figure out what flavor of the leadership ice cream we want to be eating that month by what people tell us we're supposed to do, right? It's a place where we're always asking, how am I doing? How am I doing? How's now? Now? Right? And people get frustrated with folks who are like this, but actually everybody's got a piece of this, right? We've all got a piece of this. And the news, early research and early theorizing in adult development said, this is what happens to you in adolescence and in university. This is what kind of late adolescence, your early 20s looks like. Then they did research, and they actually talked to grown-ups, and they found out this could be the rest of your life. This could be what you look like forever. And some people, but not all of us, some people are able to reach into this next place, often with help, often with different kinds of support. We begin to, instead of being a kind of audience member for our own life, we realize we could pick up the pen and we could begin to write the story ourselves. And we decide what we want to put into the world. So here in the Leadership Circle, they talk about that as creative. Because instead of reacting to the world that comes with you, like an audience does in a play, you actually create the world that you want. You pick up the pen and you write it yourself. So Bob Keegan talks about that as self-authoring. You're writing your own world. But look, there's another guy, right? So it doesn't actually stop there. Even though the journey of many adult lives is from the first place to the second there's this other place. And in some ways, the good news and the bad news about leadership today is that it looks more and more like what leaders are being called to do is to keep traveling. Once they reach that self-authored place, to actually keep traveling to a place where, in fact, they understand that you and I write the script together. You write some, I write some. We write it in a context. We write it in a conversation. We are collectively writing the script. And because that's a place where if you're really in that space, you're learning and learning and learning all the time. You're changing who you are all the time. Bob Keegan talks about that as self-transforming. You're actually self-transforming. You are on a leadership development journey. Always. That's who you be. Does that make sense as a kind of a framework? Ripping through it really quickly. You take like a semester-long course at Harvard about that. You could do your dissertation on it, but there it is in 4 minutes. Okay, so if that's the journey, then people's question tends to be, how do you move? Right? What takes you from one place to the next? And here we're brought together by our interest in, our love for this particular tool, the leadership circle, which I have to say I think is in my experience, has been the single most transformative thing I can do with a client, is have that conversation. But then what do you do when you're not having that conversation? What happens next? Here's the issue I want to think about. Gregory Bateson says this: if I am right, the whole of our thinking about who we are and what other people are has got to be restructured. The most important task of today is to learn to think in a new way.